Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
Dave Smith, I was sitting in my car, which was parked at the end of the Rivertown Diner parking lot. My car was parked in front of the Pines Motel parking lot, and across the street, I could see its tattered sign and faded walls. It was a sad place. It's strange, but I was thinking about Sue. We met when I was 8, and she was 9. Our family moved from the East Coast, where all my friends were, to Rivertown. I was depressed, but when we moved, a beautiful girl was watching us from the other side of the street. She came up to me as I sat, watching the movers, and said, "My name is Sue Redmond." "What's her name?" I smiled, my mind flashing. "She's so cool." "I'm Dave." "Dave Smith," I replied. "It's great that you're moving." "Dave Smith," Sue said happily. "There are no children on our street at all. We can become friends." And we became friends. She was a year older than me in the 4th grade, and I was only in the 3rd. Sometimes her friends would tease her for being friends with the younger kids, but we were like brother and sister. She turned out to be a real tomboy, and we often went into the woods 2 blocks away, climbed trees, or took fishing rods and went fishing. We made other friends over the years, but especially in those early years, we were best friends. In high school, everything changed. Driving and dating became important. She could do all of this a year earlier than me. First, we discussed her dates, the guy she liked, and the reasons for her choices. I realized that I didn't like it. We were close, like brother and sister, but it became increasingly clear to me that I didn't think of her as a sister. At the end of her 3rd year and my 2nd year of high school, her parents went away for the weekend. Sue was very popular, and her mother was worried about leaving her alone at home. Sue promised that she wouldn't go on any dates or attend any parties while they were gone. Her mother said she didn't want any boys coming to their house. Sue promised that no one would come. That Friday, as she was getting ready for school, she again promised her mother that she wouldn't tell anyone that her parents were leaving. She turned down Bobby, her current boyfriend, when he suggested they meet, saying she was busy with her parents that weekend. She apologized to her mother for this little lie, but added that they did have plans, just not joint ones. She was going to spend the weekend sunbathing in the backyard and was expecting her parents to return on Sunday. I was bored on Saturday. Nothing was happening, so I decided to go across the street to see what Sue was doing. I rang the doorbell, but no one answered. Sue often lay on a towel in her backyard sunbathing. The yard was secluded behind tall bushes and old trees. There was grass, and the sun shone most of the day. I took a detour and, of course, found her. She was lying there with her eyes closed, and I greeted her long before I got close enough to startle her. "Hello, how's my little brother?" she asked. "Everything's fine now." "Even better," I replied. "Why is it better?" "I was bored. It'll be nice to sit with my best friend." We talked. I felt hot, even though I was wearing shorts and a t-shirt. I took off my t-shirt. I didn't think about it. I don't know if I started looking at her differently without a t-shirt or if she was looking at me, but suddenly she said sharply that she promised her mother not to let any guys in while they were away. I was shocked and disappointed. I tried to tell her that I was hardly a guy, but she didn't want to hear it and sent me home. After that, we were still best friends, but we began to grow apart. I turned 16, got my license, and started dating girls. She also dated all the time. A year later, she graduated from school, and I saw her even less often. She started working to pay for her local college tuition. Our lives no longer intersected. The following year, I graduated with honors and received a full scholarship to UCLA. I worked in Los Angeles while I was studying, and except for Christmas, didn't see the Midwest until after I graduated. But we were destined to meet again. Sue and I met again. I had been sitting in the diner parking lot for 20 minutes. Despite its shabby appearance, the Pines Motel had one feature that made it popular. It was an L-shaped building. The office was at the front, overlooking the road, and the rooms were in a row perpendicular to the road, with parking directly in front of them. The office hid the rooms and parking lot from prying eyes on the street. To many who only used motel rooms for a couple of hours, this feature seemed remarkable, but this was only at first glance. The Rivertown Diner was located next to the Pines Motel, and most of its parking lot was in front of the building. However, when the restaurant was full, people had to park in the back lot. This rear parking lot provided a direct view of the rooms and the cars parked in front of them at the Pines Motel. More than one pair of lovers was accidentally spotted by friends, relatives, or even spouses, some by accident, and others, like me, specifically waited. I knew what I had to do, but I didn't know exactly when. It wasn't up to me. My thoughts wandered to California, UCLA, and Mali. I studied engineering, and most of the students in my classes were men. One very notable exception was Molly Thompson. She was wonderful and much more desirable than good grades in almost all of our general courses. While most of the young and ambitious engineers tried their best to get close to her, she was not interested in her classmates. She was dating someone, but clearly not from the circle of nerdy engineers. This changed when we were in our senior year. Unlike my classmates, I never tried to get her attention. I didn't like the fact that she considered herself superior to us. So apart from discussing calculus, structures, and thermodynamics, we barely communicated. She met in her circles and I in mine. Just before my last semester, she asked me, "Dave, you never asked me out on a date. Why? You've always made it clear that you don't like engineers." Yes, you're probably right, but after all this time, after studying how everything works, I'm tired of these businessmen. Do you understand what I mean? Let me say this. I thought you were the most beautiful and desirable woman on campus since freshman year. I would have asked you out many times if I thought I had a chance. So, if you're thinking about it now, how about dinner and a movie on Saturday? It seemed to me that her eyes became a little moist. You were so sweet, and you made everything so much easier than I could have expected. I'll be happy to go. We went on our first date that evening. She made it clear that she was ready to come to my house, but I had real feelings for her. I wanted to get to know her better and was afraid that if I went straight to intim, my younger mind would prevent my older mind from getting to know her the way I wanted. We kissed a little in the car before I walked her to the door. "You're weird," she said. "I thought we could get to know each other better tonight. You know, Molly, we've known each other for almost 4 years, even if only as colleagues. I would like our relationship to become something more, much bigger, I think. But if we immediately become lovers, I won't get to know you as much as I would like. This is weird, Dave. It's probably nice, but do you really put night on such a high pedestal?" Sitting in the car and waiting, I thought that this should have been a warning to me, but it passed me by without even touching a hair. I had several partners in college, and usually I would have been happy to invite a girl into my bed on the first date, or even earlier if I could. But now I was looking for a life partner and didn't want intimate to cloud my judgment. She, on the other hand, saw night as just one part of a relationship. I have never met such a sweet and thoughtful guy. "It seems like I wasted a lot of time on others," she said. She kissed me on the cheek and went home. As I drove back to my apartment, I thought about who she was. First of all, she was beautiful, tall, 59, I was 6 feet, weighed 175 pounds, about 130 pounds, and very curvy. She had green eyes, long brown hair, and beautiful lips. She was also smart and witty, and we had common interests. It seemed like it was a marriage destined by heaven. On the way home, I decided that I would marry her. We had only 3 or 4 dates before we decided to become an exclusive couple. Christmas was approaching, and we both wanted to introduce each other to our parents. We couldn't decide where to go, so we drew lots. We went to her family's house from December 24th to 30th, and to mine from December 31st to January 6th, when we had to return to university. I enjoyed meeting her parents, who immediately fell in love with me. Molly had a younger brother, Mike, and we got along well too. She was from Phoenix, and it was nice to enjoy the nice weather the entire trip. We met with her old friends and relatives, and it was a wonderful time. At noon on the 30th, we left for Chicago and then took a short flight to the Quad Cities, where we rented a car and drove to Rivertown. My parents also fell in love with Molly. She was everything that future relatives could dream of. My mom and dad were the only children in their families, so our family was small. Just the 6 of us, as they called themselves. Mom, Dad, and their brothers and wives. We had a great time. By the 3rd of January, everyone was back at work. We still had a couple more days to explore my hometown. While everyone was busy, we drove past Athearn Manufacturing, and Molly saw that there were a lot of different vans and trucks parked in the parking lot. She asked me what the company did. I described it as a great little firm. They take standard vans and trucks of various sizes and turn them into mobile restaurants or trucks for specialized businesses, such as computer repairs, curtain fitting, etc. Business has boomed, especially with the rise of online sales. Molly majored in engineering product development, which really interested her. An endless number of possibilities opened up for the creation, design, and production of new products. "I want to work there," she exclaimed enthusiastically. I had rarely heard such delight in her voice. "I'm sure my dad or one of my uncles can arrange an interview for you. Uncle Bill is a lawyer. He knows everyone, and Uncle George works for Dumbarton, but I'm sure he has the right connections." "What is Dumbarton?" she asked. "This is the largest employer in Rivertown. They produce chemical products. Some are sold under their own brand, but most are manufactured on contract for large chemical companies." "Oh, I see," she replied, but she was not at all interested in that. She was already thinking about how to get a job at Atherton. As we were driving back to my parents' house, we passed the 4-story Dumbarton headquarters building. "Do you think Uncle George is there now?" she asked. "I think so. He's the vice president of purchasing. Let's go see him." This trip to see George Smith, my father's only brother, set off a whole chain of events. George knew all the Aon executives through the golf club. Additionally, Aon was a major customer of Dumbarton products. George had convinced Aon to use local cleaners, degreasers, and detergents, which he could offer at competitive prices since delivery costs were almost nothing. Everyone was happy. George easily arranged for Molly to have a morning meeting with the general manager of Aon, Greg Aon, grandson of the company's founder and current president and CEO. Greg loved showing off his business. He was in his mid-40s and involved in every aspect of his company. He loved his company, its employees, and its products. This was the meaning of his life. Molly's enthusiasm fired him up. The more he showed her, the more interested she became, and he wanted to show her even more. By lunchtime, they were quickly exchanging ideas about what they had tried, what they could try, and what they hadn't yet tried. Greg invited her to start work that day. She was graduating in May, and they agreed on a position and starting salary. "Isn't this wonderful? We'll live in your hometown. I love your parents. Greg Aon is the best boss in the world. Life is wonderful," she said excitedly. I smiled at this whirlwind of enthusiasm. So my first question should have been, how did it go? But I think I can ask the next one straight away since it looks like we'll be living here. "Do you want to marry me?" She screamed yes, then lightly hit me on the arm and said, for such a sweet romantic, that was a lousy proposal. But she smiled and was happier than ever. "I was planning on taking you to the jeweler tomorrow to pick out a ring," I said. "I'll try to be more romantic next time. Maybe you should get a job at Atherton too," she suggested. "No, I've always preferred Dumbarton, and I'm sure Uncle George can get me there. I'll talk to him, and he'll help me get a great job." So, a chance excursion to a small business brought us both jobs and a marriage proposal. It was one of the most successful days in the life of any couple. We returned to Brentwood, completed our studies, and began preparing to move to Rivertown. At this time, Molly and her mother were planning a wedding in June, which was to take place in Phoenix. We graduated at the end of May, sold my car, got into hers, and drove to Chicago, where we left her in an airport parking lot and went on a week-long honeymoon to Maui. When we returned, we went to Rivertown and rented our first apartment. We had great jobs, so we chose a 3-room apartment overlooking the river. On June 21st, we started working, and our life as a married couple began. I had been waiting in the parking lot for over 30 minutes. Waiting is the worst. Night with Molly Smith, an engineer and wife, was even better than with Molly Thompson, a student and fiancé. We loved each other passionately, and kisses often led us to the bedroom, where we would end the day. Sometimes we started the next day the same way. Sometimes I would come home and find, for example, a jacket with patches on the elbows, a pipe, and an oar with a note that read, "Professor Molly behaved badly in class." It was always fun. Role-playing, hot intim, trying things we wouldn't normally do, and then, as if lowering a veil, we'd return to ordinary intimate love. Another time, I was greeted by a cowboy hat, boots, and a belt with a toy revolver. The note read, "The teacher is in her room. All the guests are at the city festival. The house is empty. Miss Molly is afraid of guns. Point a gun at her, and she'll do whatever you say." I did so, and she complied. The most memorable incident was when I came home, and although her car was parked, she did not answer my numerous calls. I went into the bedroom. The door was closed, which was uncharacteristic. There was a note on the door. I'm waiting. This will be fun, I thought. As I opened the door, I saw her without anything, her hands tied to the head of the bed. To this day, I don't know how she managed to tie herself up like that. The sight of a woman in this position is difficult to describe in words. That evening was incredible. As it turned out, this was another important warning that I missed. We were 25 years old, and I wanted to buy a house. Molly understood that a home would also mean family. We were both looking forward to this, but sometimes she joked, it's like a pig and a chicken looking at a village of starving people. The hen offers to give them ham and eggs, Molly said with a smile. The pig says, well, for you it's generosity, but for me it's obligation. She loved her job, and during her time there, she went from being Greg Atherton's mentee to becoming something of a mentor to him, helping him find new, innovative solutions. Atherton's business flourished. How about working from home? I suggested one day. I'm sure Greg Atherton would let you do almost anything. I don't know. I think it's unlikely. He had a wife, but she didn't have a husband, she said. They got divorced, and now all his energy is focused on the company. He doesn't see anything else in life. I don't think that's what we want to achieve. No, you're right. This is a meaningless existence. But I'm only 25. We still have time. Let's wait a little. How much is a little? Not now, I replied. That's where we stopped. A few months later, we revisited the issue. Let's have our first child at 28, Molly said. So, we'll start trying next year. This made me immensely happy. We had taken an important step forward. Our love and relationship were back in full force, as were our passionate fantasies in bed. Life was wonderful. We were engrossed in our new careers and in each other. We spent a little time with the Smiths, but not too much. We joined a golf club, but we rarely went there, only to meet the required monthly minimum. Mostly, we saved money and made love. Our intimate relationship remained as tender and sensual as before and did not fade away. Molly seemed even closer to me. She often showed me how much she loved me. But suddenly, the wild night stopped. One Saturday, I walked into the house, and she was sitting in the kitchen with a cup of iced tea. It had been a couple of months since I had found her tied up in bed, and I knew how much she loved being taken by force. I grabbed her hand, pulled her toward me, and she screamed, asking me to stop. I was stunned. I stopped immediately, though I was so confused that I could barely find my voice. I'm sorry, I said. You used to love it, and I thought that since we haven't played in so long, you missed it too. Well, now I don't like it, she replied sharply. You can't just take it and use it if you want. Take advantage? I asked, shocked and hurt. My liberated wife had suddenly changed. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll never do it again, I stammered. But I didn't finish my thought as she turned and went into her office. I spent the rest of the day there doing little things. Are you going to have dinner or what? Her voice interrupted the silence. Those were the first words either of us had spoken in hours. I'm not too hungry, so I'll probably skip dinner. What's that supposed to mean? She asked. Just a joke. No thanks, I don't want dinner, she simply said before turning around and leaving. Usually, if we spent a Saturday evening at home, we would watch TV or a movie on the History Channel. I left the office, went to the living room, and turned on the TV. Molly was sitting on the couch reading a book. When the TV started playing, she got up and headed to our bedroom. I turned off the TV. Molly, what happened? I asked. I don't know. Probably nothing. I don't understand why I'm so angry with you. We used to play like this all the time, but now I don't want it, and it bothers me. I don't want to take it out on you, but I just couldn't help myself. It's okay. I'm not fragile, I reassured her. No, it's not normal. Life is changing. I struggle constantly at work and feel like I need the feeling of love and security at home. You love me, and you give me that feeling. This is exactly what I need from you. By the way, I have an idea. Would you like to make me feel safe now? She smiled. I didn't have to ask twice. We quickly found ourselves on the bed. When it was all over, we talked for a long time. After a while, the topics of conversation were exhausted, and I was already falling asleep when I felt her kiss. Maybe it's good news that Molly hasn't come yet. Everything between us is too beautiful. Perhaps Sue was wrong. Maybe she was jealous. These thoughts made me remember a conversation. Greg wants me to work with the production manager for a while, Molly said. We need to improve existing products to make them easier to produce. I met the boss today. Interesting woman. Is the production manager a woman? I asked in surprise. She laughed. You don't think women can do this kind of work? I laughed too. No, honey. I think women can do whatever they want. Tell me about her. I just met her today. I don't really know much. She's about my age, blonde, of average height. Her name is Sue Dobson. She's new to this position. Before that, she spent almost all her time at the plant. The new job has really taken over Molly. She and Sue often argued, but quickly became close friends. Both were results-oriented, but looked at things from different angles. Surprisingly quickly, they learned to work together, changing processes to make production more efficient without losing function. After a few weeks of working together, Molly suggested we go out with Sue and her husband on a Saturday night. I was all for it. We had few friends because we spent all our time at work. We decided to go to the restaurant at the country club, which had a beautiful view of the river. We agreed to meet them in the lobby and enter the restaurant together. Molly and I waited there for a couple of minutes when a couple appeared at the door. "Oh my God!" Molly exclaimed. Dave, Sue said in surprise, looking at Molly. "You never said you married Dave Smith." Sue came up to me, and we hugged like brother and sister who hadn't seen each other for years. The husband who had arrived with Sue extended his hand. "John Dobson," he said. "I take it you already know each other." Molly laughed. "My name is Molly Smith. No, my Dave is just a very outgoing guy. He regularly meets women this way," Sue explained. We all laughed. "Molly, you won't believe this," Sue continued. "Dave moved across the street from me when I was 9. He became the little brother I never had. We sat down at the table and started discussing our childhood in Rivertown. Sue and I chatted while Molly and John listened politely, but without much enthusiasm. "If you were so close, why did you lose touch?" asked Molly. I looked at her, surprised by the question. I didn't remember the exact reason. Then it was probably just a childhood friendship. The difference of 1 year seemed huge back then, and older girls don't hang out with younger boys. We never thought of each other as a boy and a girl. Suelafne. Almost never. I looked at her, not understanding what she was talking about. When my parents went away for the weekend, and I was home alone, she continued, glancing at me briefly. I suddenly understood what she meant. My little brother wanted to come and play, but when he took off his shirt, I saw a handsome guy in front of me. I promised not to accept boys while my parents were away, and suddenly, he became the boy who had to leave. After that, Sue and I both laughed. He started dating girls. I never seriously thought about dating a junior in high school. Girls don't do that, Sue added. We remained friends, good friends, but our paths crossed less and less. I left school a year before Dave, and I didn't know what I wanted to do, so my dad, the production manager at Atherton, got me a part-time job there. "Did you take over your father's position?" I asked with a smile, although I wondered why my family never mentioned her. The thought briefly flashed through my head, but I didn't ask questions about her, and our parents were never particularly close. The thought disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. "Yes, I did. He's very proud. He retired after 30 years of work, although he enjoyed his job. Now he and my mother live in Florida, close to her family. As he says, he still has a family member in the industry." The evening was great and marked the beginning of a strong friendship. The four of us became inseparable. Time seemed to slow down, and all I could do was wait. I started to worry. Molly wasn't being honest. We had just had a fight. She promised that as soon as she completed her project, we would start looking for a house and having children. She returned home, beaming at how well her project presentation had gone. "I'll call the realtor," I said. She looked at me and said, "I told you after this project I'm working on now." I wrote down the date of her last promise. This caused a quarrel. "Why don't you believe me?" she shouted. "Why aren't you trustworthy?" I answered, and we argued again and again. This had become commonplace. The next day, the secretary called me on the intercom. "Mr. Smith, Sue Dobson has come to see you. She says she doesn't have an appointment." "Certainly, let her come in." We exchanged greetings and a kiss on the cheek. Then she sat down, clearly nervous. I don't know how to say this, so I'll say it directly. Molly is acting strange. I'm sure she's going to have an affair. I wish I could say it was a shock, but it wasn't. I don't know what's wrong, but I know something is definitely wrong, she continued. We have a supplier of paint and varnish materials. I'll say this guy is simply handsome. 63 or 4, strong, probably weighs 225 pounds, all muscle. I think he used to play football before he got injured. He's confident and uses his charm on everyone. Molly became interested in him. Do you know she's already cheating, or is she just about to? No, I don't know for sure, but I overheard their conversation. I was supposed to meet her at her office. She went to the door, and I heard him say to her, "Pines Motel. You are a woman of easy virtue." He called her a woman of easy virtue right to her face, and she just giggled. I heard her ask something about Pines, and I stepped back and waited another minute or two until he came out. He looked at me and immediately turned away. We don't have the best history. I went in her office and asked, "What are you doing?" She simply replied, "He's such a villain, isn't he?" "When was this?" I asked. 20 minutes ago. I tried to tell her that she couldn't be with him. She looked me straight in the eyes and said she wasn't. He just loves to flirt. I left her and came here. Pines has that reputation, Sue said. Did she say what time? No, just something about tomorrow afternoon. That's all I heard. She started lying, so it will be useless to talk to her today. Like with you, she'll simply deny everything. I'll wait in the parking lot of the cafe nearby. There's a hole in the fence between them, probably so people can get from the motel to the cafe. Wow, you seem to know this place well. Not really, but like I said, it's a popular spot. I have a friend who sometimes patrols from the cafe's parking lot. You're a good friend, Sue. Hopefully, the shock of seeing me out front will put her back on track. Do you think this is the first time? I don't know why I repeated the question. I was probably hoping to hear an answer. I think yes. Mr. Aon and I handle all paint purchases. That's how I found myself in someone else's car in front of the Pines Motel on a Wednesday afternoon. I arrived at 11:30. I didn't want to miss the chance to stop her. I didn't want to shame her afterward. I wanted to stop her before. It was approaching 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and I was still waiting. A few minutes later, my wife's blue BMW appeared around the corner, drove past the office, and parked opposite number 5. There were no other cars in the motel. She was alone in the car and just sat there. She was looking at the motel, so I got out of the car. I was wearing a wide-brimmed hat and big sunglasses, and unless she looked straight at me, I didn't think she'd recognize me. I walked toward the gap in the fence, and just then, a Chevy Impala pulled up and parked next to her car. A tall, strong man quickly got out of the Impala as Molly was getting out of her BMW. I walked toward them, but I could have had a neon sign and a drum, and they still wouldn't have noticed. Their eyes were only on each other. They met in front of her car. She extended her hand to him, and he said something. She quickly pulled her hands back. I said, "Sorry," took off my glasses and hat. The glasses were in my jacket pocket, and I just dropped my hat. He turned and looked at me. "Are you having problems?" It was more of a growl than a question. "The girl is my wife," I said without much emotion. "Maybe, but I'm going to get her now." "Molly, please, let's go home." Molly just stood there. I think she was in shock. She didn't answer or acknowledge me or him. "Get away from us, and everything will be fine." "I can't do that. I'm sorry, but I'm taking my wife home." I raised my voice and moved towards her, moving around him. "Well, I guess that's it," he said, turning his back to me and pretending to walk back to his car. I took another step, and suddenly, he turned around. I woke up in a hospital room with an IV in my arm and bandages on my face. I tried to sit up, but realized that everything hurt. I found the call button and pressed it. It took some time before anyone appeared. A businesslike nurse came in and said, "You have returned to us. I'll call the doctor now. This may take time, and we are short-staffed on Sunday nights." I tried to say, "Today is Sunday," but all that came out of my mouth was a wheeze. "If I understand you correctly." "Yes," she said, looking at her wrist. 3 o'clock in the morning Sunday. "You were brought in on Wednesday afternoon. If I'm not mistaken, you were beaten badly." "My wife?" I wheezed. "She was here almost the whole time. I think she left for the first time a couple of hours ago." "What?" "I think that's enough for today. Rest. I'll inform everyone that you've returned to us." She pressed the button on the IV, and the world suddenly disappeared. When I woke up again, it was light. People were milling around, and a middle-aged, balding man looked at me and said, "Mr. Smith, can you hear me?" I opened my eyes and nodded. "My name is Dr. Michaels. I'm a neurologist. Can you squeeze my fingers? He placed 2 fingers in my palm. I squeezed. He pricked me with a sharp object and touched me in different places. Finally, he said, I'm pleased. You will fully recover. Then I'm happy too. I replied, my voice seeming to recover. Are you strong enough to be questioned by the police, Mr. Smith? I wondered how much strength it took. You were unconscious for a long time. Answering questions can be tiring. If you get tired, tell them. I've already told him that. If you say you're tired, he should stop. Agreed. Where is my wife? She's here, but the detective asked to talk to you first. Well, then let him come in. It seems strange. Why couldn't I just say hello to Molly? Why couldn't she be with me during the interrogation? But everything felt a little strange. Maybe I wasn't thinking clearly yet. Mr. Smith, my name is Lake. Detective Lake. Do you mind if I ask you a few questions? It was a rhetorical question. I simply nodded, and he continued. Do you remember how you ended up here, Mr. Smith? When he asked, I didn't know for a moment. I thought, and then the memories came flooding back. I was at the Pines Motel, waiting for my wife and her potential lover. They arrived. I tried to talk to her, but she seemed to withdraw. I told her friend, a big, strong man whom I had never seen before, that I wasn't going to give up my wife. He seemed to walk backward, but then he turned around and hit me. From that moment on, I don't remember anything. This man, one Ray Harrison, claims that you hit him first. I don't know his name, but I can guarantee that I didn't hit him. Unless I can hit him while in a coma. Have you and your wife had problems? My wife, what did she say? She's here. Let me ask the questions, Mr. Smith. I promise I want to do the right thing. There is conflicting information, so it's my job to find out the truth. I do my job well. Did you and your wife have problems? Not like that. I mean, not with other men, at least that I know of. Our good friend, Sue Dobson, came to me yesterday, or the day before yesterday, when they were supposed to meet and said that Molly was dating this guy. She said it was the first time. Lake asked me about Sue and gathered enough information to go and question her. He asked the questions in different ways several times and made sure that the first time I thought about the other man was when Sue told me, and that I decided to meet them there because I was afraid Molly wouldn't tell me the truth. He thanked me and left. Molly must have been standing by the door because she burst into the room almost the second the detective left. Oh my God, Dave, I was so worried. I'm so sorry. I don't know how I got you into this. She finished speaking and began to sob. She was in tears. Why, Molly? You know why. I'm not making excuses, but he influenced me so badly that I seemed to go crazy. I thought our love had driven away my need for rough intimate, but he was like catnip. I'm so sorry. Luckily, you stopped us, but look what happened to you because of my stupidity. Can you forgive me? You were right there. Couldn't you stop him, Dave? I'm so ashamed. I just shut down. I think it was a panic attack. So I agreed to meet a man for the first time in our entire marriage, and you were there to catch me. I just froze. The police say he said I hit him first. What did you tell them? Dave, I'm sorry. I don't know what happened. I saw you, and then you were on the ground. I called 911, and the police and ambulance came pretty quickly after that. I looked at her. That was the story I was sure of. Why can't she be honest anymore? Suddenly, I felt tired. No worse, I was exhausted. Call the nurse. I don't feel well. She quickly jumped out of the room, and I sank back into unconsciousness. I woke up again, and it was dark. There was no one in the room. I pressed the call button, and the nurse returned. What time is it now? What time is it? What was that question? Am I losing my mind? It's Sunday night, Mr. Smith. You've only slept for a few hours. The doctor asked me to find out if meeting your wife is causing you any anxiety. Yes, I did. It was wearing me out. I felt pretty good when she arrived, but after a few minutes, it felt like all the air had been let out of me. Why is this important? In a couple of days, you will be discharged from here. Do you want to go home? My parents, were they here? Yes, but your mother asked so many questions that your father said she was driving us and herself crazy. He added that you don't need visitors unless you ask. We have to call them when you ask. What time is it? She looked at her watch and said, 11:30. Call them right now. I want to talk to them. She looked at my card and dialed the number on the phone in the room. She handed the phone to me. It's calling. That Ilistanat. Well, it could have been better. Listen, when I get discharged from here, I want to live with you for a few days. Molly isn't telling the truth about what happened, and I don't want to put pressure on her to finally accept her guilt. Thank you. My father handed the phone to my mother, who needed to hear my voice and know that I was getting better. She burst into tears and was glad that she could look after me while I recovered. On my last day in the hospital, Victor Garland came to see me. Mr. Garland was an assistant district attorney. He wanted to talk to me about the results of their investigation. He said they were going to arrest Mr. Harrison for grievous bodily harm, battery, and a number of other lesser offenses. He said that because Harrison was previously a law-abiding citizen, he would be released on bail after being charged. The trial would take place in 3 months. I asked him about the conflicting testimony and how my wife claimed she didn't see anything. He looked at me and said that he wanted to trust me with something important. He explained the case, the difficulties he was facing, and what he wanted me to do. I thought about it and agreed. Yes, I can do this. But it turned out that I couldn't. I stayed with my parents for almost 2 weeks. I asked that Molly only visit me during the day, stay for dinner, and then leave. She did this without objection. We discussed everything, but we didn't talk too much or too often about that day. I believed her when she said she was confused about her intimacy. She saw me as her safe haven and needed my love. She said she realized she also longed to be taken. I could play with her, but my nature was not aggressive enough. She was like a ticking bomb waiting for the aggressive Mr. Harrison, and I saved her. She sincerely regretted what she had done. This was no one's fault but hers. I kept telling her that it was not she who dealt the mean blow to me. She began to sob uncontrollably. The tears were real, but I couldn't believe her emotions. She couldn't be so devoted to Harrison that she would protect him with lies, but so far, she had done it. Or perhaps she just couldn't remember until now. I stayed with my parents for a month and was ready to go back to work. Molly and I decided it was a good time for me to move back to our apartment. I still wasn't sure where my connection to her was. Molly was sorry and promised to be faithful in the future, but her actions that day and before that day were still something she couldn't come to terms with. She agreed to family therapy. During the time leading up to Harrison's trial, Molly became more and more stressed. She became completely immersed in her work, and our family life suffered. Our nightlife had almost disappeared since I got home. I slept in the guest bedroom, and every now and then, Molly would sneak into my room at night, and we would make love tenderly. We started therapy and had some success. However, the elephant in the room, Harrison, still remained an unresolved problem. But it became obvious to both of us that I would take her back. Our love could survive one almost perfect mistake. The night before the trial, Molly came to me and said she needed to talk to me. I have to testify. Mr. Garland is going to call me first. I thought you still couldn't remember anything. I can't, but he said I should still perform. Molly, you'll just say this once. Your denials are unconvincing. Garland thinks you'll tell the truth at trial. If you don't tell the truth, he will turn against you. Please be careful and honest. I promised Assistant District Attorney Garland that I wouldn't warn her of his intentions, but I just couldn't help myself. I've never been to court before. It's not all what they show on TV. I can assure you Harrison had a good lawyer. Before the start of the case, they filed petitions on one issue and argued on another. Everything was settled. Who won and who lost remained a mystery to me. The jury was then sworn in. The prosecutor stood to make his opening statement. He explained to the jury how I had been brutally beaten by a man who was so cowardly that he gave me a mean blow and kicked me repeatedly while I was unconscious. He described the dirty date and explained in detail how it all happened. He then outlined the crimes Harrison was accused of and how he intended to prove those crimes. When he finished, I was sure Harrison was going to jail for a long time. Harrison's lawyer then stood up. He said he didn't understand why we were here. Mr. Harrison, of course, admits that Mrs. Smith showed interest in him, and he is ashamed that he succumbed to the charms of this beautiful woman. He arrived at the motel. She had already rented a room, and suddenly, this man screamed at him and attacked him. Of course, he defended himself. Mr. Harrison grew up in difficult circumstances and was never given a chance. He was born into poverty and lived in terrible conditions. His father was cruel, but he rose above it and received a scholarship to college. He played football and made it to the NFL, but he never made it to the first game of the regular season. He was seriously injured, and his career ended before it even began. He did everything he could. He had a good job. He was a model citizen until this woman, he pronounced the word as if it were not a gender designation or diagnosis, captivated him. He was alarmed and was ready to cheat with a married woman. Suddenly, he was attacked, and he defended himself as the streets had taught him. He is sorry that he hurt Mr. Smith, but he couldn't help it. Smith attacked him and paid for it. When the lawyer finished, I was surprised that I was not in the dock. The prosecution began presenting its evidence. The first witness was Molly. She stepped up to the podium. Garland asked her questions about that day, and she fidgeted and squirmed, but eventually said she was shocked when I said, "I'm sorry." She said she had never experienced anything like this before and just froze. I relaxed. I believed she was going to tell the truth. She burst into tears. It was a good performance, but it seemed to me that it was just an act for the audience. I started to get nervous. She was asked if she remembered what happened after that. She said, "No, not really. Everything was like a fog. Do you remember when your husband said, 'This is my wife?'" "Oh yes, I remember." And then Mr. Harrison said, "Excuse me, but he said she's mine for a night." Why would he say that? We were about to go into the room. She burst into tears again. This time, it seemed more sincere. "The room you rented, correct?" "Yes." "He set everything up on purpose." "Who?" "Mr. Harrison. My husband is so caring and kind to me." And Mr. Harrison was the complete opposite. It triggered something in me, and I gave in to it. He told me to meet him at a dirty motel, and I just agreed. He said that he would arrange everything, and I should take the key. I went in, but nothing was organized. He just wanted me to humiliate myself, and I did it. I'm terribly ashamed, but that's exactly what I did. So after that verbal exchange, do you remember what happened? Not really. Well, I think so. Yes, I remember Dave got angry and hit Ray. I almost jumped to my feet, then suddenly sat up straight, and then went limp again. I thought my world had collapsed. I was sure the jury was looking at me. I wondered if they saw my reaction as shock at her lies, or as resignation that I had been caught in a lie. I passed out. Garland asked questions and reformulated them in different ways, but she sobbed and stood her ground. I struck first, she said. I remember he asked her one last question. "Mrs. Smith, what if I told you that the motel had a working security camera?" Molly calmly replied, "That would be great." Garland completed his questioning, but Williams, the lawyer, asked that cross-examination be postponed until the defense presented its evidence. The judge granted his request, and a 30-minute break was announced. Garland took me to the conference room. "Im shocked" is an understatement. I was sure she would tell the truth. "How are you going to prove the case now?" His black eye is not from a punch, but from being hit by a car fender. "We have DNA and evidence. The hospital examined your hands while you were in a coma. No bruises, nothing. You didn't hit anyone. We also have some bad camera footage." "What's wrong with her?" "The camera was supposed to scan the central numbers all the time and alternately capture the numbers from the edges, but the scanning motor burned out or something like that. The camera was at the end of the building and only showed numbers 8 through 12. She parked opposite the 5th one, and he parked opposite the 6th one. If he hadn't kicked you so hard, you would have ended up in front of the 8th man. We wouldn't have had anything. I'll get a guilty verdict, but now that I'm doing this, I'll go after her too. It pains me to admit it, but I still care about her. At the same time, we're done with her. If she has to go to jail, then so be it." I saw Molly as I left the meeting room. I asked her not to be in our apartment from 5 to 7 o'clock. "I'll take my things and go back to live with my parents." She tried to talk, but I said, "We have nothing more to discuss." She hung her head and said she wouldn't be there while I was. We returned to the courtroom. I was the next witness. "You have already taken the oath, Mr. Smith. Are you ready to answer questions honestly?" Garland's opening line struck a chord with me. I didn't understand. This offended me. Of course, I would answer honestly. Why was he asking this? "I'm sorry, Mr. Smith. Mr. Harrison's lawyer presented a completely different version of your beating, and I want the jury to see the truth." "I object." Harrison's lawyer stood up, blushing and protesting loudly. The judge looked at him with a straight face. "Mr. Williams, I understand that you have an objection. On what grounds?" "The prosecutor is testifying, Your Honor. It's not enough that he's trying to convict an unfortunate citizen on false grounds, but now he's testifying to influence the jury. So are you, Mr. Williams. Let me remind both sides. You're here to question the witnesses. The jury is here to listen to their answers. And I'm here to make sure everyone follows the rules, which you don't seem to be doing very well right now. Therefore, I support the objection. Mr. Garland, ask your witness questions and let him answer. Mr. Williams, when I asked for a rationale for an objection, stated, I don't want to hear your testimony. Is everyone clear? Judging by the expressions on your faces, you're both equally unhappy, and that makes me happy. Let's continue. Garland started asking questions about who I was, where I worked, and then we started talking about my marriage. Did we have a good marriage? Did I suspect my wife of cheating? Finally, he came to the question of the day on which the altercation took place. Can you describe what happened when you saw your wife get out of the car? The accused was also getting out of his car. He walked to the front of his car and turned left to meet her in front of her car. I walked out into the parking lot of the Pines Motel and walked up to the right of his car. Neither of them noticed me. They were talking. Continue. I made myself known. I think I just said sorry. He turned and gave me a look full of contempt. My wife just stood there. She didn't say anything, didn't scream, and basically didn't do anything. She just looked shocked. I said that she is my wife, and he replied that now she is his. Excuse me, Mr. Smith. Did you accurately convey his words? Well, not really. I didn't think it would be appropriate. Mr. Smith, we need to reconstruct the events as accurately as possible. So, what exactly did he say? He said she might be my wife, but the intimate is his. Continue. I told him I wasn't going to give up on my wife just because he said so. He said, well, I guess that's it, and he turned around, took a step, and then suddenly turned around and hit me. I woke up in the hospital. Garland looked at Williams, the lawyer. Your witness. Losing a wife to another man is humiliating, isn't it, Mr. Smith? I don't know. Remembering that day, maybe the details are a little blurry. Still, you lost consciousness. He looked at the jury as if losing consciousness meant losing his mind. Isn't it more plausible that you saw your wife in the arms of another man and screamed, "Get away from her. You stupid?" I didn't say anything like that. Everything happened exactly as I described. Then, to make matters worse, your wife said, "Leave me. I'm with a better man now." No, like I said, she didn't say a word. And then, in a fit of rage, you hit my client, didn't you? No, quite the opposite. He hit me slyly. You know what perjury is, don't you? I object. Pressure on the witness. Accepted. Are you sure, Mr. Smith? You claim you never hit my client, but he had a black eye. Can you explain this? No, I didn't like this answer, but Garland clearly told me to answer yes or no to all questions if possible. I could, so I answered. Did he have a black eye when you asked him, as you put it, not to give up on his wife because he said so? Did he have a bruise then? As far as I remember, no. Are you unsure of your recollection? Or did he really not have a bruise? Damn. Answer yes or no, idiot. He didn't have a bruise. And you remember this clearly? Yes. Well then, despite what anyone said, you had this fight, and he had a black eye, right? No. Well, he didn't have a bruise before the fight. That's what you said. We didn't fight. Please don't interrupt me, Mr. Smith. I haven't asked a question yet. He didn't ask a question, but grinned brazenly. He didn't have a bruise before the fight, but he did after. How do you explain this? He hit me on the sly and knocked me out. He didn't have a black eye when he hit me. You say that he got it after? I'll take your words on faith. You mean you didn't know he had a black eye? He knocked me out with one punch. I woke up after a coma in the hospital. I saw him again today. Now he doesn't have a black eye. When could I confirm the presence of this black eye? I had a blast with him. Why would he ask me such a question? Then he started asking more questions. He claimed that Harrison said that I was not a man at all, and that this supposedly made me angry. No. Now you're making up a different story. Everything happened as I said. What other story? I don't understand. I'm sorry, sir, but you understand perfectly well. You want me to repeat your last set of false questions so that the jury will be confused about what I said and what you said. I just said it was my wife. He said it was his. Night. I said I wouldn't give her up just because he said so. He hit me. This is a fact. He repeated this 3 or 4 times, thinking about what he said or what Molly said and what I did and how the fight started. I knew better than to get involved and just went back to my original statement. When he finished, Garland stood up and said he had questions on the interception. Mr. Smith, Mr. Williams has offered so many different theories about what could have happened. Could you refresh my memory and tell me what really happened that day? I protest. The question has already been asked and answered. Accepted. Mr. Smith's version of what happened is clear enough, I think. Your Honor, what does his version mean? You have no reason to doubt his testimony. The judge looked unhappy. He paused and turned to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, let me say a few words. My statement was completely neutral. My job is not to decide whether Mr. Smith told the truth or not. That's your job. I could say Mr. Smith's account of what happened, but he testified. It's your job to determine whether he was being completely honest, completely dishonest, or somewhere in between those extremes. There will be more witnesses. When everyone has finished their testimony, the lawyers will make their closing arguments, and then you will have to decide what happened and whether any laws were broken. Is it clear? He examined the jury carefully and made sure they understood. He then looked at Garland and said, Mr. Garland, does this satisfy your doubts? Garland stared at him until he admitted that he was satisfied. I think that's enough for today. It's almost 3:30, and I'm afraid that we won't have time to conduct direct and cross-examination in the remaining time. Mr. Garland, we will hear your next witness tomorrow at 9 o'clock. The court is closed. On the second day, the trial continued. Garland showed a video from the motel. It was short but showed Harrison's rage and anger, which was extremely judgmental for him. The video did not show the start of the fight, and there was no cross-examination. Garland then called a forensic expert from Chicago to testify about Harrison's eye. Photographs showed he had a severe black eye, but the expert said the wound could not have been caused by a punch as there were no knuckle marks on it. It was also concentrated on the cheek below the eye and diminished on both sides. This was consistent with hitting a curved surface, such as the fender of Harrison's car. The expert explained that he took a sample from the front fender of Harrison's car, near the headlight, and found his DNA there. There was a dent in the fender made by Harrison's face. The expert made it clear that Harrison had deliberately hit his face on the wing to make it appear that he was in a fight. Williams did an excellent job on cross-examination, pointing out that the expert had never seen Harrison's injury in person, only in photos, and that the dent in the fender could have been from his buttocks while he was sitting on the car, and the DNA could have come from being waxed. Garland was sure, but I wasn't so sure. We adjourned the meeting to the second day. The third day began with Mr. Garland saying, I called Dwight Reynolds. I protest, Your Honor. This is a complete surprise. Mr. Reynolds is not on the list of witnesses provided by Mr. Garland. The defense lawyer said, I'm sorry, Your Honor. I didn't know Mr. Reynolds had anything to do with this case. If I may ask a few introductory questions, I am confident that you will allow his testimony. I allow questions, but only about how he ended up here. No questions about the incident. Do you understand me? The judge's gaze could have wilted flowers. I'm sure Garland understood everything. Mr. Reynolds explained to the court, when you and I first met, I saw your picture in the newspaper, so I knew who you were. I learned that the process starts at 9 a.m., so I arrived here around 8:30. Excuse me, Mr. Reynolds, what day did you arrive here? Oh, today. I just met you today. Why was it important that we meet today? Because of what she said. This woman, sorry again, Mr. Reynolds, the judge interrupted, but we're not talking about details yet. Is it correct to say that you believe you have something important that can help? Well, yes, as I already told you. Not now. Please, let me ask you, have you been previously questioned by the police, lawyers, or anyone else? No, as I already told you, Mr. Reynolds. I'm sure you want to say what you want to say, but please be patient. Why did you decide to get in touch today and not earlier? I'm ashamed of this. I guess I just didn't want to get involved in it. I saw that they had arrested the guy and that he was going to be tried, so I thought it was okay. He'll get what he deserves. Stop. That's enough for now, Your Honor. It is obvious that Mr. Reynolds was not known to the prosecution. His testimony will be useful. I ask that it be allowed to be heard. Mr. Williams? The judge turned to the defense lawyer. My protest remains, Your Honor. This man appears here suddenly when the defense has failed to prove its case, and there is no telling what he is going to say. This is inappropriate, untimely, and irrelevant, and the defense strongly objects. We'll see if it makes a difference. I permit the testimony to be heard to determine its relevance. Garland asked Reynolds how he got involved in the case. He explained that he had come to have lunch at the diner as usual. He arrived at about 11:30 and the parking lot was full, so he had to drive around and park next to the Pines Motel. He saw some guy just sitting in the car, staring ahead. He wondered why. Then he remembered that he had business at the post office, so he turned around and went there. About half an hour later, he returned and found a good parking spot closer to the road, near the diner. When he walked in, he saw the same car again and the same guy still sitting there. He had lunch, and when he came out, the guy was just getting out of the car. He saw this guy walk toward a couple of large, well-built men and a beautiful red-haired woman. They apparently stopped talking and looked at him. The guy in the car started walking toward them, and the other man seemed to turn to leave, but then turned around and hit him with a right hook, sending him flying. At this point, Garland interrupted. "You say he was a large, well-built man. Do you recognize him here today?" "No, not really. That person at the table over there might be him, but I was quite far away." "Your memories seem very clear. How is this possible?" "I recorded everything on my phone." "I protest, Your Honor." "That's enough. This man claims to have seen something at the Pines Motel, but cannot identify my client, and now wants to present a long-distance video that shows nothing. I think we'll know what it shows after we watch it. We'll watch it in the judge's office first." The two lawyers, the technician, and the judge retired to the judge's office. 20 minutes passed, and they returned. "The court is returning to order. Mr. Williams, do you still wish to object to the showing of this video?" "Thank you, Your Honor." "Yes, I object. This is a surprise, unconfirmed, untimely, and irrelevant. Your protest is rejected." The judge nodded to the technician who was working on connecting the phone to the large television. "When you are ready, please show the video to the jury." The video was filmed on a phone. It was vertical rather than horizontal and showed a narrow view of the Pines Motel. It showed me walking toward them wearing a hat and glasses while Harrison was talking. I took off my glasses and hat. You could see the hat falling into the parking lot, not in an aggressive way, as if I was preparing for a fight, but more as if I had lost the desire to hold on to it. Harrison stopped and looked at me. Molly continued to stand as before, facing him, but he approached me. You could tell I had said something, although all that could be heard was the noise from the highway 20 feet away from Reynolds, and we were 200 feet further. Harrison could be seen saying something. Then apparently I said something too, because I was walking toward him, my back to the camera. All this time, Molly stood motionless, without emotion on her face. Harrison turned halfway, then turned again with his right hand and hit me. Molly still stood motionless. It was creepy. Harrison looked at her and stopped a short but destructive attack on me. He walked over to his car and did something like a one-armed push-up on the fender next to the headlight. Then he simply let his hand slide off the wing and fell face first onto it. He shook Molly, rummaged through her purse, found her phone, dialed the number, and handed it to her. I believe it was her call to 911. She ended the call, and he started talking to her again. The video ended. Reynolds said he simply got into his car and drove away. At that point, Williams remained calm, as if we had just watched a couple of minutes of a daytime show, and asked for a 24-hour break in light of the new evidence. The judge granted his request. It was Thursday, and the trial resumed on Monday morning. I stood up and turned to leave. I saw Sue sitting in the back, leaving the courtroom. Molly called and contacted my mother on Saturday morning. She asked to speak to me and was persistent enough to convince my mom to hand over the phone. "What is it, Molly? I need you to listen to me for at least a minute. I'm not asking for forgiveness, and I'm not asking you to come back, but I want you to understand one thing." "Okay, spit it out." "You're not very sincere, but I deserve it. I passed out when you came and found us. I don't know why or what it was, but it was as if I was paralyzed like in a dream. Suddenly Ray shook me, and I came to my senses. He even dialed 911 for me and told me to call the police and an ambulance. I did it, and then he told me you hit him, and he went completely crazy. He was going to jail if I didn't tell the police what I saw. I thought he was telling the truth. Molly, the past lies didn't work, so now you're coming up with new ones. It was so hard for me to witness that you hit him. I really thought you did it. I would never have done this if I didn't think so. I hope he goes to jail forever. I'm so sorry." She passed out. Well, damn it, I thought about it, and her story actually matched the video. Maybe there was at least a drop of truth in her words. I decided to at least tell Garland about it and see what he wanted to do with the information. I called him at home and left a message for him to meet me at 8 a.m. on Monday in his office. We met, and he started talking as if he wanted to tell me something. I asked him to listen to my important news. I told him in detail about Molly's call. He shook his head. Late, and it's short by more than $1. Why? This video changed everything, and aggravated felony is a sure thing. I might even get a charge of attempted murder. They're scared to death. They now claim that it was a long-standing affair and that your wife wanted you to be hurt, maybe even killed. She provoked him, knowing his temper. Do you believe this? You are, of course, a romantic. This cannot be taken away from you. She lied to you. She lied in the courtroom. Her lies were exposed in front of everyone, and now she's calling you with a new story. You peck at it like an egg from a high nest. What if she's telling the truth? I don't know, probably then the earth will stop rotating and the sun will fall out of the sky. But this can happen. Her story matches the video. Dave, get your head out of your fifth place. Of course, her story matches the video. Someone warned her that there was nothing in the first video that would refute her lie, and then, bam, a second video and a new lie. She's your wife. I understand that, but I see things like this all the time. Her story will change 10 more times. You can rest assured. Let me warn you. She's being arrested right now on charges of various conspiracies, including the attempted murder of Dave Smith. I inhaled sharply. I warned her to tell the truth. I hope this is now true. You saw the same video as me. You saw that she was paralyzed with fear. I would say, do you think it was because she was caught cheating for the first time in her life? Come on, I thought about that too, but when you asked her about the security camera footage, she seemed to really want it to be shown. She wanted it too much. Someone hinted to her that there was nothing in the first video that contradicted her lie, and then bam, a second video and a new lie. You will hear more from her, and perhaps more than once. She is trying to take full advantage of you. Consider this a Miranda warning. I am the prosecutor on this case. If you want her words to be used against her, give them to me. He looked into my eyes. She looked into my eyes and lied. I want her to go to jail. Well, I want everything to happen according to the facts. Let it ride. Dave, you are naive if you believe this. You want her to be as innocent as you want her to be, and then a fairy tale ending where you get your wife and your old life back. This won't happen. Let me tell you a story. Your wife and her new lover live in perfect harmony. She decides it's time to move on from being a boring engineer. She hints to her friend Sue that she is thinking about getting into bed with a paint salesman. She knows that Sue will tell you about this, and you'll try to prevent it. She feeds Ray stories about how you're a dangerous psycho. You show up, and her lover uses you like a soccer ball, while she pretends to be paralyzed. We'll have a messy divorce. Wouldn't it be easier to just hire a lawyer, Dave? Dave, you were one step away from a better world. She just stood there. She didn't say, "Oh, Ray, don't touch your poor husband." He even had to dial 911 for her himself. You're telling a dark story. Crap. My name is Ray Harrison. This is perhaps the saddest story you've ever heard. It's so sad because I'm completely screwed, and none of this is my fault. I'm sitting here waiting for my lawyer. I paid him a fortune because I got into trouble with a woman of easy virtue who turned out to be too accessible. It's not my fault, but she stood on the podium and lied. Maybe this will be my salvation. If my lawyer is good, he'll use it. I grew up in Philadelphia. I was a tough guy. Tough because I was always larger than my peers and naturally strong. I was a good student. I needed to get good grades if I wanted to get into a prestigious university on a scholarship. I had solid talent, although I was a little slow. I needed to be an excellent student so that the school could offer me an academic scholarship. I got good grades and a scholarship. I played defensive lineman at a mid-major university. I was tough, a great tackler, and by my senior year, I was an All-American. I graduated and was drafted in the 5th round by the Eagles as an outside defensive lineman. Despite my progress, I was told I was too slow. At the very first training sessions at the beginner's camp, I needed to demonstrate my abilities. During one play, the opponents decided to attack on the flank where I was standing, and I literally swept away the runner. The offliners were unhappy with my shot, and in the next play, I was sandwiched between the guard and the tackle. This pissed me off. I started waving my fists and hit a 335 pounds tackle right in the jaw. He wasn't impressed. I lost the fight and was kicked off the team. Well, to be honest, there was more to it than that. After the fight, the coach said that I had to improve or I would have to leave. I told him it wasn't my fault. He just shook his head and said that the report about me was accurate. I was slow, didn't give it my all, and refused to admit I was at fault for anything. He said he liked my hard hitting, but if I wanted to become an important player on the team, I would need to play like that all the time, and I would have to learn to control my aggression. When the team rewarded me for my efforts, I had already been pill tested, so I added steroids to my training regimen to increase my aggression, strength, and speed. Who knew I would be tested again? Obviously, it wasn't my fault. This led me to sales. I was good at it, but there was always this anger burning deep inside. It wasn't my fault losing a fight got my attention, and then they held a grudge and tested my urine again. I was a victim. My anger has been both a blessing and a curse. With women, I have never been able to build a long-term relationship with anyone, but I found that many women, especially married ones, found intimate with a man irresistible. The formula was simple and common. They created a false image of themselves in front of their husbands, and they were tired of this image. All I had to do was remind them a couple of times how bad they could be, and they became mine. Usually we had no more than 6 meetings. They would start to get scared, I would start to get bored, or more often than not, my schedule would fill with new opportunities. Life was very good. The intimate was amazing. They didn't need dinners or romance. They were ready for anything. I learned to recognize such women from a distance. It was like hunting on royal grounds. But Molly Smith literally fell into my lap. I accidentally met Greg Atherton at a gas station. Can you imagine? I was his main paint supplier. We were just chatting about this and that, and it looked like he wanted to show off. He told me that at the gas station, there were a couple of rooms used for hard-hitting pleasures. He said that his girlfriend, although he didn't call her that, was a wild little thing, but he didn't say who she was. He said that to get a room, you just had to say you're Scott Abbott, leave a $500 deposit, use the room, and wait for them to check for damage. Then they would return your $350 deposit. I asked him why they would mistake me for Scott Abbott, since he and I aren't that similar. He laughed and said, "The receptionist knows me by my real name, but I always register as Abbott. To be an Abbott, you need to show a valid ID, which costs $500. Give them cash, and you're an Abbott." We were talking when a woman came up to him with an envelope, handed it to him, thanked him, and left. He opened the envelope and took out $300 bills, 220s, and a 10. I thanked him for the information and left. On the way out, I saw a pretty engineer who worked for Atherton getting into her car. She looked around as if she were nervous. You'd think she had on that wild little thing written on her forehead. I immediately realized that she wanted to be commanded and ordered to do all sorts of obscene things. The problem was that I didn't know how to meet her. All my contacts at Aon were through Atherton himself, and he certainly would not have offered her. I also knew the production manager. Her name was Sue, or something like that. I once tried to hit on Sue. One of the nice things about married women is that they leave no doubts. Some are already ready for a relationship. Others are ready for nothing. In terms of those who would never agree, Sue would be number one. When I first approached her, barely having time to say hello, she immediately stated that she had already heard about me, and it was better for me to stay away from her and all the other women in the company.